Welcome to Punchline's Talks, the business breakfast briefers. My name is Mark Owen, and each week I'm joined by a panel of business experts and civic leaders to talk about the national newspapers, find out what's going on in their own individual businesses and their own individual business sectors, and finally, what's caught their eye in this week's Punchline. Before I start, I'd like to thank our fantastic sponsors, Hazelwood's Business Accountants and Tax Experts. And if you like the show, please like, share, and subscribe. Okay, let's meet the panel. Today, we've got Toby Coombes. He's the director and architect at Coombes Everett, based in Cheltenham. They employ 12 staff, a turnover of just under £1 million, and they've been going 13 years. We've got Dr. Polly Pick, director of business engagement and partnerships at the University of Gloucestershire. Polly's worked for 10 years in sales and marketing electrical industry as well, which I didn't know before this show. I just looked up her bio. Welcome, Polly. We've got Tony Davey. He's the owner of 2 retail outlets in Stroud, Confection, Affection, and Party on the Up. Thank goodness I've got that. He's also an independent town councillor, chair of the Stroud and District Chamber and Commerce. So welcome to Tony today. And last not least, my very good friend, Roger White. He's the MD and owner of Seven Side Software. He's an IT guru, and he's one of the only few people let in my house during the COVID pandemic. So welcome to Roger as well. Okay, let's find out what's happening on the national news front. Courtesy of the BBC. Here we go. Let's run through the headlines. We've got the Metro, farewell Mrs. Miniskirt. The Financial Times, a story that's caught my eye in the Financial Times is EY warns UK arm of fresh cutbacks after failure to split. The Times, unions look to set reject deal on nurses' pay. The story that's caught my eye here, which I know Roger's going to cover, is driverless Ford gets the green light in the roads. The Daily Telegraph, deaths rise as junior doctors go on strike. The Daily Mail, at last, a leader who knows what a woman is. The Eye, families plead for disabled children to get access to their own savings. The Daily Express, no appetite to make peace with Harry. The Daily Mirror, rapist gets his hand on 7 million lottery jackpot. And the Daily Star, it's in the pits. And the paper that's missing there is actually the Sun. And I don't know why, but it's not on the BBC today. Who knows? Anyway, let's crack on. Today we'll start with Toby. Toby, welcome to Punchline Talks today. What have you picked out from the papers and the news?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. A couple of pieces. One more serious and one a bit more positive. First one is and it's across the papers, is the article on potentially looking to need planning permission for Airbnbs, and so you kind of read into this, and really it was a question to me on, firstly, do the planning departments need this additional burden at the moment? Local authorities are under massive amounts of pressure, and is that the right way of managing it, I guess, was the first question. There's obviously a lot of negativity in terms of Airbnb parties, and so there may be a place that it needs managing, but is that the right legislation to do it under, as a question? There's also, I guess, the bigger picture in terms of whether Airbnbs are positive to our holiday towns. So I grew up in Torquay, and it's one of those things. There's lots of hotels that are suffering, but I think it's how we're living at the moment, how we're holidaying, is this much more flexible approach.
I think it's quite nice to bring. I'm going to bring Tony in actually, just very quickly. So he's a town councillor, and you deal with tourism there as well. Airbnbs, very quickly, Tony, good or bad?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag, really. And when I looked at this story yesterday, and again it's repeated today, it's one of the first things I thought of is that something extra that we need in planning, but it gives a new accommodation element in the mix. And whilst it does impact hotels, it also offers something different. And hotels, just like everything else, are evolving. So I think there's space for both, but actually more regulation in Airbnb territory, that's probably not a bad thing.
Thanks ever so much for that. And I think, Tony, you're right, because planning, is an absolute nightmare, isn't it? To try and get things through planning at the moment, to try and clog it up with Airbnbs. Surely it's just going to slow down the whole process. Anyway, before we go into that, even maybe deeper, now, Toby, what have you else? Another story that you picked out quickly?
Yeah. So the other story was about how positive thinking can sharpen your memory in old age. So I guess there's obviously a lot of negativity around in the world at the moment, and it just kind of put a bit of a smile on my face in terms of actually let's have a positive approach. And the research effectively said have a positive approach, and you're 30% more likely to be more to have better memory over 65. So I kind of thought, well, hang on a minute, that's something. Let's all have a positive approach to what we're doing, and it will help us in the future.
Well, I think we'll all be a lot happier as well. Okay, thanks ever so much for that. Polly, thanks for joining us today. What have you picked out from the papers? What's caught your eye?
It's my pleasure, Mark. Thank you for having me. I've got a couple of stories really about supermarkets. So the one that caught my eye earlier on was the Tesco story about despite having a 7% increase in their turnover and their trade, they've actually experienced a 51% reduction in their pre-tax profits, which is massive. They're still very profitable. You know, we don't need to be sort of crying into anything about how Tesco's are doing, but they have experienced this big loss. In most of the coverage, they seem to be targeting their suppliers, which is interesting. They had a big fight earlier in the year with Heinz about some of their increases in prices. And most of the coverage that we tend to see from farmers and other suppliers is that as a customer, Tesco squeeze people pretty hard. So it's interesting to see that.
They've always done that though, Polly. It's always been a complaint.
And that's
and they've always been a terrible payer as well, allegedly.
Yeah. So I mean, they don't, they also make their money on their overnight cash holdings and how much people pay to be positioned in the supermarket and all that sort of thing. So but it's interesting to see what they're saying. So the main thrust of what they're saying is that it's an increase in the supplier prices, but they've also obviously got more competition from the likes of Aldi and Lidl. And then another sort of related story today is that people are using more frozen food. And I think the underlying thing in some of the Tesco's coverage is that their customers are kind of trading down to different brands. They're not going for the finest, they're going for some of the value stuff. And the move from fresh to frozen by consumers is interesting as well, because obviously frozen food is generally cheaper, but there's also less waste, if it's you're moving away from the chilled stuff. So it's just an interesting place for them to be in at the moment. And I think it's quite funny that they're quite ironic, should we say, that they're blaming their suppliers for a lot of that.
They're still UK's biggest supermarket, though, aren't they? And
massive, yeah. And
they do a great delivery. I get my Tesco delivery, Tesco, Sainsbury's, and anybody that are delivered to me cheaply. Anyway, thanks ever so much for that, Polly. Right, I'm going to go to Tony. Thanks ever so much for joining us today, Tony. Great to have you on the show as well. And I've been in your shops lots of times, delivering magazines, buying the odd sweets. I've got here also that you're a principal balloon decorator. It's quite a good thing to have on the CV, but we can talk about that. Anyway, what did you pick out for the papers?
Thank you for having me on this morning. So there's a couple of stories, and the first one is from The Guardian. Looks like it's going to be blurred out thanks to technology, but nonetheless, there it is. So it's senior Tories turn against Braverman's racist rhetoric. And I don't think any negativity in politics helps. I don't want to focus on any particular flavour of party, but I think it is important to acknowledge that the circus that we've had in Westminster just continues to roll. We've had a really unfortunate time in politics, and the impact of that is far further reaching than just in Parliament, and it impacts people throughout local politics, right down to parish and town council level. And I think that's really bad. It disengages people with local politics, which is extremely damaging. It taints councillors and everyone with largely the same sort of brush. And that is desperately disappointing, because local politics is really important. It's also really hard work. And there are some phenomenally good people out there of all parties doing amazing work. But this sort of behaviour, which senior Tories, but very few of them have actually wanted to be named, which is unfortunate. And this can also happen in other parties too, just for balance. I think it's just really bad, and the impacts are really serious.
I couldn't agree with you more. And there are so many really good local civic councillors and parish councillors that work tirelessly. And let's be honest, there's not a lot of money in it. It's not for the money. That's a shadow, without a shadow of a doubt. And no, keep up the good work there, Tony. Right, okay, let's move on to Roger. Roger, what have you picked out from this week's part? Not from us, for the papers today.
Okay, so being an IT guru, I've decided to go for there's a story in the Times, and I think it's in the Telegraph as well, that the first driverless car has been approved for use in the UK. It's a Ford car, and it's the Mustang Mach-E, and it's actually got permission from the government to be driverless on motorways only at the moment. So effectively, the way it works is it'll only engage on approved roads, which is only motorways at the moment. But it's going to be a bit weird. I mean, obviously, driverless cars have been coming for quite a few years, but we haven't quite got there. But obviously, we're going through different stages of how driverless it is, and obviously there's different levels of automation. With this particular offering, it's quite interesting because it is approved, as I say, on the latest model, and it will then creep down to some older models. But you obviously have to keep your eye on the road. That's the quite interesting thing, and the car will detect if you don't keep your eye on the road, but you don't have to touch the steering wheel. It's a bit of a weird thing, because we're sort of getting there in stages. Some people would argue that cars with drivers need to keep their eyes on the road anyway. But it's interesting that we're definitely heading for a driverless car society, but we're still not quite there yet. We're teasing our way into it. But Ford's Blue Cruise system will be the one that, for a subscription of £17.99 a month, you can take your hands off everything and if you don't look at the road, then the system will effectively disengage.
What happens when you want to change your CD, or I suppose they don't have a CD player anyway, or flip your cassette deck?
That's very 90s, Mark. I think we've got to keep up with the times here. It's all streaming music now, isn't it? You don't need to change your CD anymore because you don't have one.
Well, you just blot your eyelashes then. But what happens when you get distracted or talk to the person next to you? Does it disengage suddenly?
Well, yeah, it will. I don't know. I think where we're going partially into it, obviously, I don't see the benefit of it if you can't trust the whole thing, and not, you've got the fact that the car will monitor your eyes to make sure you are looking at the road. I'm sort of not really seeing how much different that is to, say, the modern cruise control systems that you have now anyway. But this technology is coming, and it's, as I say, it's creeping forward. And it'd be weird to see, people when you're on the motorway with their hands not on the wheel. But
I'll tell you one thing: if I overtake one of them, I'll be giving it a really wide berth. That's one thing. I see a Mustang on the road nowadays. I'll be looking at it in a different way. Thanks ever so much for that, Roger. Okay, we've come to the end of this sort of newspaper section of it. Toby, let's go back over to you, please. You've obviously been in business quite some time. How's business, and what's some of the projects you've been working on? And tell us a bit more about Coombes Everitt.
Yeah, so Coombes Everitt, based in Bath Road in Cheltenham. We do a lot of residential, which varies primarily from sort of that developer residential, sort of the 2, 3, 4 sort of houses on more difficult sites, through to conversions of listed buildings, through to one of the ones we finished last year was the scheme up at Windrush, which was the former hotel that was converted to a whole series of apartments, local shop, some houses. So that was an interesting one to go through. Other things we've done, we've just finished the new Warner's Co-op at Bishop's Cleeve. So local centre there with sort of local convenience store, gyms. I think there's going to be sort of the whole Domino's pizza. So that sort of that just to support the amount of housing around there, really. Similar thing over in Upton and Severn for Warner's. But one of the things we've been working on probably for 10 years is just finishing a £5 million scheme for the National Star College up at Ullenwood. So again, really, really good client, really positive, amazing work they do up there. So it's, yeah, so a real broad bag, really.
No, fantastic. And I've seen all the, we ran a number of stories about the National Star as well. Absolutely fantastic bit of work there you guys have done. So congratulations on that. And the other projects as well. Okay, thanks ever so much for that. Polly, let's go over to you, please. I want to talk to you today about the sort of unspent apprenticeship levy and the apprenticeship levy itself. Has that been a big success, the apprenticeship levy?
I think it's been a big success. So a number of organisations, particularly in construction, would have had a compulsory training levy for many, many years. But this came in 2017. And since then, we've had well over 1,000 apprentices go through learning all sorts of different things. And as a university, it's interesting for us because it means that we access people who might not have gone to university. And we have lots of business leaders who are doing senior leader apprenticeships, and we do nursing training, engineering, all sorts of things that otherwise people might not have accessed university in quite the same way. So I think it's a very positive thing, and it encourages businesses to take, a more proactive approach towards their staff training and development, which is only a good thing, really.
So if you haven't spent the levy, apparently you give it to somebody else, is that right?
So any organisation with a salary bill of over £3 million a year automatically pays 0.5% of anything over 3 million into a levy pot. And for some organisations, that's obviously a really substantial amount of money. And in some circumstances, organisations manage to spend that. I think our local NHS trusts are very good at spending all of that. But often for organisations, they've got a bit left over. And if you don't spend that for 2 years, that eventually goes back to government if you don't do anything about it. So government has introduced schemes where you could transfer that levy within your supply chain or within your local network. And they've recently taken all the sort of caveats of that, and you can pledge that levy to anybody. And when we had, you'll remember this, Mark, when we had our National Apprenticeship Week back in February, we got a lot of interest, a lot of discussion about how larger businesses pledge that levy to other people, so we can keep it in the county or we can keep it within your network and your supply chain, and how smaller businesses can access it. So if you're an SME, for say, for example, a £14,000 MBA senior leaders apprenticeship programme, you would only pay £700 of that as part of that. But for some organisations, even £700 is, it's a lot of money, and it's a chunk to devote to one member of staff. So what we want to do is to enable those local businesses, local SMEs, to be able to take some of the unspent levy that larger businesses aren't using and use that to fund the training of their staff. So we've got an event next Thursday for larger businesses to explain to them the benefits of doing that and how they go about it and how we can help them to do that. And then we'll be running a sort of sister event to that, where smaller businesses can come along and find out how they get their hands on some additional training budget.
Okay, so the event itself is on Thursday, the 20th of April at 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And how do I get and book my place? Obviously, it's Eventbrite.
Okay. So Eventbrite, if you go on Eventbrite, it's on there. If you look on our website under our business pages, it's there, or people can email me. They can find me quite easily in LinkedIn or whatever, and we'll put them in touch with that.
Okay, thanks ever so much for that. Okay, let's go over to you, Tony. Thanks, Polly. Tony, right, great to have you on the show. As I've said, I've delivered magazines to your 2 different places for quite some years, and pop in there and buy some sweets when I'm there as well. Never blown up a balloon, but there you go. So what's it like on the high street at the moment? Stroud seems to be doing well. The Shires seem to be doing well, but what's it like in Stroud?
I mean, I actually represent the Stroud district as part of the Chamber of Trade for the Stroud district, and I think it's a similar scene across. It's still tough, and in some ways, actually, it's tougher than it was as we were coming out of the lockdowns. And I think one of the important things to remember here is that the death of the high street is basically just lazy and inaccurate narrative. Largely pumped out by national press because it gets them a bit of clickbait, and it's not relevant, certainly when you look at our businesses here in the Stroud district and wider Gloucestershire. And whilst I think it's true that we're still suffering from those tombstones of the nationals, it's the national businesses that have suffered far more than the independents, who've been a lot more agile during this process, and that leaves us across some of our high streets with some quite large estate that's just not being snapped up at the present moment, which can give a negative view. But I think generally it's optimistic, but it is really hard work. And so what we as a chamber look to promote is to remind people the importance of think local first, because when you spend £10 in a local independent business, £8 of that stays in your local economy. You compare that to going to an out-of-town supermarket, or as I often refer them as a public wholesaler, because they're squeezing their supply chain and pushing things out, sometimes at a cheaper price than independents can get them themselves. You're talking about often just £2 to £3 at most. And then if you buy it online elsewhere, almost nothing. And that has a massive effect then on not just those independent shops, but it's employment, opportunities, the way our towns look and feel, both for people who work there and live there, and of course our visitors too. So we've got struggles. I don't think there'll ever be a time when we don't have struggles, and there's never been a time when we haven't. But I think that our high streets are robust, and I know that we're going to just continue to force through on this, but it does need the help of our communities.
But the councils themselves have got to blame, because they let them build all these supermarkets out of town and the big business parks.
It is a difficult one, and they bring employment too, but it's just how much that brings into our local economy. We also rely heavily on tourism, and I have to say I'm feeling really, really positive about our staycation economy in the coming few months. As part of the chamber, we run the visitstroud.uk platform, which is great for raising awareness of the Stroud district and all the things that you can do in it. We were part of English Tourism Week last month. We got an engagement of around 22,500 people. And of those that visited the website, over 2/3 of those engaged. So that gives us some really positive views to the future on how we can bring people sustainably into our district. And they're going to learn about our culture, visit our festivals, and realise that we're actually not just an undiscovered part of the Cotswolds, because there are other parts that are a bit more chocolate boxy than us maybe, but we're also a very authentic part of the Cotswolds.
You certainly are. Do you know what? I love Stroud, Nailsworth, all that sort of Five Valleys. It's absolutely fantastic. I can't remember. Toby, was the last time that you went to Stroud? If you don't mind me asking.
Would have been quite a while ago, but my better half's from down that way. She grew up in Haresfield, just around the corner. So yeah. So
Well, you can't be. I tell you what they've done with the Five Valley Shopping Centre is quite spectacular as well. It is well worth a visit. All of you get a chance watching. Roger, let's bring you in now. Okay, Seven Size Software. I know you do my IT and you do lots of people's IT. So, what's the big issues going on at the moment in your business?
I think what was the big push on IT is everything going to the cloud. Most systems now are cloud based. There's still people with systems which are legacy systems where they have to have everything on a server, but the world is moving to the cloud, and connected with that, which is a pun really, is that you need good internet connections. And it's still amazing how many business parks have limited options on getting good internet connection without paying a fortune for a private circuit. But it is changing. Obviously, the government is pushing all this connectivity for better internet, where you have your fiber cable into your premises, which gives you super speeds provided by different providers. But it is rolling out, so it's very noticeable, because you can't have your stuff in the cloud if you haven't got decent internet connection. And our business is seeing big push for connecting systems in the cloud together. So if you've got your CRM system and then you've got your account system, and you want the two things to talk to each other, so you're not entering your data twice. So massive market for connecting things in the cloud together. That's what we're seeing. But we still need this push on internet connectivity, and also the constant challenge of cyber security. There's always something going on. It's worse than ever. It's making sure that customers do actually take it seriously. It's a bit like insurance, isn't it? You only sort of bump up your insurance after you've realised when you've had a claim, and cyber's a bit like that. People need to be encouraged to spend more time in training, so as well as anything that can be done to reduce the risk.
Okay, go on. I'm going to ask you, what's your top number one tip to keep your cyber secure?
Training. Stop people clicking on dodgy links, and some of the email phishing attempts are very good. So training is my top tip.
Yeah, and these false invoices that we get as well. It's absolutely looked fantastic. You think, oh, who sent me an invoice for that?
Yeah,
I don't know anybody.
you click on it. Yeah.
I've actually had the odd panic attack, by the way, everybody, where I've actually phoned Roger and said, Roger, I've clicked on this. What are we gonna do about that? Anyway, we won't go further than that. Thanks ever so much for that, Roger. Right, we're wrapping up, coming to the end of the bit of a show. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So going to go back over to you, Toby. What have you picked out for this week's punchline, please, mate?
I think there's a number of things. Really, it comes back to my earlier positivity comments, and just about how much investment there is happening in Gloucestershire and how great a county it is to live in. Things like the new cyber park coming, that will have a massive change and a massive investment in both in terms of jobs and knockdown industries to sort of Gloucestershire. The new 417 improving kind of physical connectivity. Linked with that, I guess, new junctions on the M5. The retail outlet in Tewkesbury that's will come online shortly. Gloucester Quay still trading, still attracting people. Next coming back after a brief absence. So just really, I guess, thinking about this, and let's celebrate where we live. It's so varied, from kind of the banks of the Severn and the Avon through to sort of the, like I said, the picture post box, Cotswold villages, and everything in between. Really, it's a fantastic place to live.
I couldn't agree with you more. It is absolutely fantastic. Thanks for that, Toby. It's a great roundup of Punchline. Polly, what have you picked out from this week's, please?
So there were a number of things, as always, Mark, but I think the thing that stood out for me was the appointment of Anne Keith-Butler as the new director of GCHQ. I think that's great to see a woman in that role. Obviously, in all those sort of industries, women have played quite an important role for a long time. And she's coming from MI5, so I think she'll know what she's talking about. But it's a really positive move, and I'm thrilled to see it's a woman.
I'm hoping to, hopefully we can meet you soon. I'm sure she'll do the circuits, hopefully. So that'd be quite interesting to
Well,
interview.
I'd love it. We had Jeremy Fleming at an event here a couple of years ago with the LEP. So it'd be good if we could kind of repeat that success.
Yeah. No, I met him there actually. I had my photograph taken with him, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for that. Tony, what have you what's the story you picked out?
Well, I think I'm going to rather predictably pick out, but say thank you very much for covering it. Stories that in relation to our high streets across the Stroud district. So you've covered, we have a restaurant up for sale. It's been very popular as a restaurant, although more recently has just been used for fulfilling events rather than actually a usable space for the public on our high streets. You also covered the opening of the new tanning salon in the Five Valleys Centre that we have being refurbished in Stroud. And of course, the sad loss of a bike shop in Wootton. And in part, our high street footfall is impacted by banks turning their backs on our communities, and of course, the issues that we have in the pharmacy sector. But thank you for covering these stories. And whilst not all of them are positive, they do show that there are opportunities on our high street. And that is a great thing. There are lots of people that are opening businesses and some will naturally close. And I think that's an important thing. There has to be balance in there. So thank you very much for covering those.
Thank you, Tony. That's great. And do you know what? The banks really annoy me when they close and all that. Where is all the cash going? You know, there's a serious security issues here with people running around with so much money. Anyway, thanks. So it's something that we really try and push and highlight there, Tony. Thank you. Roger, what have you picked out from this week's Punch, please?
So it's great to see Punchline really on track this week with some train stories. So yesterday on Punchline was the story about the Gloucestershire Warwickshire Railway engaging with businesses, bit of business networking on a train, which I thought I missed that. But I thought what a great entrepreneurial thing for the Heritage Railway to get businesses involved networking on a train going up and down. Obviously, Heritage Railways have struggled, you know, with the cost of living stuff, cost of coal, etc. But I thought that was great. And there was also a story about Pennant with their training also being involved with training people around the railway industry and how well they're doing. So I thought, yeah, great track, keeping us on track stories.
I love your pun, mate. Thanks ever so much for that. You obviously worked that out. It's a nice bit of prep. And we kind of run out of time. The story of the week for me has to be the plans submitted for the remaining plots of Gloucester Business Park. And you are right, that development there, 350,000 square feet of new industrial and warehouse spaces of the 276 acre site, which has the cream of businesses in Gloucestershire as well. And if you're ever like me, you go around the whole of that park, there really are some fantastic businesses trading. There are some right across the county. So before we go, I'd like to thank our brilliant panel. Thanks ever so much for joining us today. Wonderful sponsors, Hazelwood's Business Accountants and Business Gurus and Tax Advisors and everything like this. And finally, if you like the show, please like, share and subscribe. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for joining Punchline Talks. Bye.
Bye.